hard. So first thing off my list. You can find us on Twitter at DataPride Tug or email us at datapridetug.com. Okay, we are a group that is a virtual community space designed to highlight, elevate, and bring together the LGBTQ community in data and its allies. We're all about highlighting work in the community, data viz about the community, and connecting the LGBTQ community in data. We've got a great agenda for you today. We'll be getting to know Tableau relationships, joins, and the analytics pane. We'll start out with a couple of updates, a little overview about pronouns. Jennifer Dawes will be showing us some new things with using and understanding Tableau relationships and joins. Halfway through, we'll have the attendance prize giveaway. And Ethan Lang will be showing us the definitive guide to the analytics pane. And after that, we'll be sharing a little bit more about our September event. So DataPride updates. We're here, we're queer, and we're excited about these updates. We just created our YouTube channel, which is DataPride Tug. This is the profile picture for it. And that's where we'll be posting our meeting recordings. And you can subscribe to our channel for updates. Another new Tableau YouTube channel is Team Data Fam. It's a YouTube channel where various Tableau user groups are uploading their meeting recordings. We plan to upload videos there too. So subscribe for the latest recordings all around the Data Fam for that one. The DataPride Tableau user group was recently featured on the Tableau community blog. This blog post is a great way to get to know our group. It includes the story of how we got started and recent visits from Pride Month. Special thanks to everyone in the Tableau community who helped make this article happen. And now, in the spirit of inclusion, let's talk briefly about pronouns and why they matter. So what are pronouns? Let's start with the basics. Pronouns are used in everyday speech and writing to take the place of people's names. We frequently use them without even thinking about it. Pronouns are words that refer to either the people talking, like we or I, or the people being talked to, like you. We are so happy you are here. Pronouns can also refer to someone or something that's being talked about, like she has a blog or they got biz of the day. Often when speaking about someone, these pronouns have a gender implied. And when someone is referred to with the wrong gendered pronoun, it can make them feel disrespected, invalidated, dismissed, alienated, or hurt. How does this relate back to the Tableau community, and why do pronouns matter? Inclusion and respectful treatment for all is a big part of the Tableau community code of conduct. Each of us is responsible for creating a safe, kind, and respectful community space for people of all genders. Simply put, we are the community that we create. Asking Tableau community members what their gender pronouns are and consistently using them correctly is one of the most basic ways to show respect for them. Discussing and correctly using pronouns sets a tone of allyship. It can truly make all of the difference, especially for new community members that may feel particularly vulnerable in a new environment like Tableau Conference. Many people may be learning about gender pronouns for the first time. And by sharing your pronouns, you will be setting an example for your colleagues. For example, when I first added my pronouns to my email signature, I was talking with a colleague at another organization on the phone, and they said, "Oh, you have your pronouns listed there. Like, what's that about?" I'm like, "Oh, it's this allyship, for inclusion and respect." And and they said, well, could I do that too? Like, my name's Robin, and people always think I'm a guy, but I'm not. Like, and could I do that? And yes, absolutely. It's all about guiding people on how you want to be referred to, and then respecting that guidance and referring to people in that way. So how can I show inclusion and respect? You can add your pronouns to your email signature and incorporate pronouns into everyday use and your use in the Tableau community space. Like your pronouns were added to Tableau Public in June of this year. You can also incorporate pronouns into introductions and spaces where you're meeting people for the first time, like conference badges, name tags, social media profiles. And if you're meeting someone for the first time, you can ask, like, what pronouns do you use? Or how would you like to be addressed? If you accidentally if someone you know changes their pronouns, you can practice using the correct ones for them. You could also practice using gender neutral language, such as saying data fam or folks or friends instead of ladies and gentlemen, or other gendered ways of addressing people. And if you accidentally use the wrong pronoun when identifying someone, you can please apologize and say thank you and immediately use the right pronoun. Everyone makes mistakes, so you can take accountability for those mistakes and continue making an effort to use the correct pronoun. I hope that was helpful for everyone. And now for our guest speakers, we are so happy to have them here. First is Jennifer Dawes. Jennifer has 8 years of professional experience in data analytics and is currently a senior consultant at Analytic Vision. In the Tableau world, Jennifer is currently a Tableau Public Ambassador and has received the Tableau Public Viz of the Day award on 8 different occasions. Jennifer is passionate about elevating, educating, and empowering women in data. She is also one of the co-founders of HerData.net, alongside her good friend, Danushki de Oliveira. She lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, with her husband and 4 sons, 2 sets of twins. Welcome, Jennifer, and thanks for teaching us about relationships and joins.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah, so much. Hi, everyone. I am very excited to be with you guys today. Let me go ahead and quickly share my screen. We will jump right in. Let's see here. Can you all see my screen? Looks like it. Awesome. And perfect introduction, Sarah. I really appreciate that. So it kind of takes care of my first slide. If we haven't met yet before, I am Jennifer Dawes. I've been working, I think it's been about 8 years with Tableau, but it's kind of a funny story of how I landed using Tableau. I was actually in HR, went to school for HR, and then started working at Unifund and met Danushki de Oliveira. And we were sitting one day talking about an Excel file I was going to pull together with HR metrics. And they kind of chuckled and said, that's great, but really we want to use Tableau. And from there, it kind of all began. But a little more background for me, yes, I'm a senior consultant at Analytic Vision, love the organization I work with. And I went a little QR code happy in my presentation, but happy to drop some links in the chat if you want to connect after. All things data are kind of my love and passion, and I definitely love connecting with the data community. So feel free to reach out and connect with me after. I am also a Cincinnati co-tug leader, Tableau ambassador, as you said, Alteryx Core certified and co-founder of HerData. But outside of the data world, I am a mom of 2 sets of twin boys, and I grew up and live in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I think my greatest passion is just serving people. Tableau, I think the reason that I switched careers from HR to Tableau and being a data visualization and data analyst was, I realized the opportunity to serve so many more by translating data and putting it in the hands of individuals that need it and need to be able to translate it quickly. And again, I mentioned my background was in HR before falling in love with data visualization. So before I jump into Tableau, that was a little bit about me. We're going to talk a little bit about Tableau. I really always love to talk about version. For any of you out there that have built something in Tableau for a client and then realized the server did not support, that little calc or the thing that you did, I think it's really important in all of these conversations to talk about versioning, as it has really cost me many hours of having to do rework. So for relationships, they became available in Tableau 2020.2. So if you're using anything there or after, you have the opportunity to use relationships. And so let's talk a little bit more about what those are and when we might be interested in using them. Before I jump too far into the detail, I really want to share, I stand on the backs of many giants. I think, or if that's the right expression, I guess. I've learned so much from the wonderful community that we have. And there's so much great and rich content out there on relationships. Keith Hilfrich and Jonathan Drummey is kind of the getting started path that I took, because I will admit I was a very late adopter. I liked my unions in Tableau because I know SQL and that's all I wanted to touch, even if it meant writing a lot of LODs. So I started watching some of these wonderful YouTube videos with these two individuals. Why did Tableau invent relationships? Exploring the difference, and then the performance pieces. And it really started to pique my interest. And then beyond that, my team at Analytic Vision, they do use a lot of the relationships. And so it began this really interesting conversation of pros and cons, when to use, when not to use, and who loves using one versus the other. So lots of great resources here. I'm happy to throw them in the chat also after, but just kind of wanted to put it out there that I don't claim to be the expert in this space, but certainly it's been a fun journey to learn so much by so many others that have produced content. Quickly jumping in, if you do go out and check out any of these resources, there's actually with the Keith Hilfrich and Jonathan Drummey, I think it was that first video, why did they invent in relationships? They have a very simple data set that I'm going to pull in Tableau workbook that kind of helped me follow along with some of their logical conversation. And I think sometimes, maybe this is true about not just me, but many people in the Tableau community, I'm a visual learner and am drawn to seeing, touching, feeling, and to be able to understand. So I think pulling the data into the workbook and listening through the videos has really helped. This was a pretty simple data set also to quickly build. So what we're looking at here independently, there are two different tables. We're looking at case data. For the purpose of this talk, we can imagine it as any kind of healthcare data that we want. We have various different facilities, the number of cases, districts, the month, and then the year. And then we have a population count. So for each of those facilities, what is the population of individuals? And then what year are we recording that population? And if you've been using Tableau for a long time, this will look very comforting because we have both tables. We have our join relationship. Everybody loves the Venn diagram here. What are we joining on? We can see the field names, and then we also see the preview of what the data is going to look like. Right away, we can see we have some null values, and something that I like to do when I'm exploring data for the first time, whether it be in Alteryx Prep or directly in Tableau, is kind of doing a quick eye shot of that. What is the results returning? What is the level of grain that I have for each of these tables? That becomes really important. And I think it's a step that, because I came from HR, I may have taken for granted. I think when I first started exploring new data sets, I would just connect it to Tableau, jump right in, start looking at some things, build some worksheets without really understanding, but what is it that I'm pulling in, right? And what is the level of detail that I'm pulling in? It wasn't until I started really getting in depth with some level of detail calculations that it started to click for me. But anyway, so if you're pulling in as a join, this is going to look familiar to you. And let's quickly just explore some of this data with a worksheet. For speed, I already kind of put a couple of calculations together here. Again, I was following along with the videos that I was learning through. And I've laid out the facility name, the year. I wanted to understand population and cases. But then as a first step, it was, let's talk about how many cases per 100 do we have? And I have a result. And at face value, nothing would jump off the page as being wrong. But I think one of my biggest points in my talk, and I gave the same talk to our Cincinnati Tug, is I think the disconnect that I had and many have with should I use relationships, should I use joins, should I use blends, is I originally was trying to think that there was a one path that was right and a one right answer, and that using the other path could be, I might get a wrong result, right? But I think what I've learned is that whether you're using relationships or joins, you're going to get a result at some point in time if you have a different level of grain that you're bringing in. So I think back to what I said before, you really have to have an understanding of the tables that you're bringing in to anticipate that and to know, is this the right answer or do I need a level of detail calculation? I think another great tip that Kevin Flerledge, when I was working with him in Danushki, he always would tell me, create a crosstab, open a worksheet, lay it out. What is it that you're trying to get? What is the calculation that you're trying to write? What is the answer you're expecting to return? And by doing that, if we lay out another piece to this and just simply put the month in here, let's move it over, we'll see that, well, for a facility B, we have multiple results coming in, which without having the level of month in view, population was being summed. So it was duplicating our data, right? So take that out, we're looking at facility B showing a record for 2020 of 150 for population. So when we're looking at cases per 100, it's giving us a 15. With joins, knowing that I'm getting duplicate records, the traditional step would be, well, we're going to have to write a level of detail calculation because we need to fix at that level what the population should be, which I had done before going on to calculate population by 100, right? So that's what I would have had to do for each of my calculations with coming in with a join. And I've done that, and you can see once I do the level of detail calculation, and then I do divide by 100, I'm getting a different result. Stop me if I'm going too fast, but basically, and feel free to throw some notes in the chat, y'all. I certainly want to make sure I'm interacting in the chat if you guys have questions. But long story short, if you've used Tableau for a while, you're familiar with this process and calculating. There's nothing new or earth-shattering here. I think when relationships were developed, it caused, for anyone that may have learned SQL first or kind of had that coding background, it was a little bit hard to trust relationships. And I think that was my issue because when we pull in the data in a relationship, and if you haven't yet done this before, when you open Tableau 2020.2 or later, instead of seeing, when you lay things out, instead of getting that opportunity to join them, you're actually going to just be dragging them over, and you'll see a line between the two. And so down here, you're going to see your fields, and you would also see a picture of what your data looks like. And then to actually see how they're connected, you would want to look at it by clicking on the line, and you're saying you're going to join on year and year. I think the biggest question that people have said is, well, is it a left join? Is it a right join? Is it inner join? Is it an out? What is it? It's all of the above. And I'm going to show you how we know that and what exactly we can use to figure out what Tableau is doing in the background in just a second. But I think the fact that it isn't there for the touching and it isn't fixed right now is the biggest difference, right? When you're bringing data in and you're joining it, you're fixing it one time for the rest of the data set, right? Whatever you do with that data, this is how the data is coming in. The difference, the key and the biggest difference is with a relationship, it's not fixed. at the data level. It is calculated at the worksheet, and I'll show you what I mean. So first thing we do is we're coming in, it's the same set of data, and I've laid out the table in the same way so we can kind of see some key differences. One other thing I want to call out, when you're working with a join, traditionally you have your dimensions at the top based on what table they're in, and then you have your measures at the bottom. And then any calculations you write would be there at the bottom as well. When you look at a relationship, it's structured different in how it is coming in. You're looking at each individual table separate. You have your dimensions, you have your measures. In the next table, you have your dimensions and your measures. I call that out because I think noticing just how it is laid out in the data pane, I think helps me understand what's happening as I start to put together a worksheet. Long story short, this is the same set of data I've laid out for facility, for year. I think I put count to population, but let's take that out real quick. We're looking at population, which I'm getting a different result. And then the cases, I don't have to do a fixed LOD here. I expected it to some population. So what's happening in the background is instead of it being a left or a right or an inner or an outer or whatnot, Tableau is calculating on the back end for you based on what is in view. And what I mean by that is if I want to look at facility, year, and cases, and it's all coming from this same table, then we're looking at only that chunk. I can give you a couple of better examples with this other data set here in a second. But basically, it is calculating with what's in view. Let's pull this one up because I think this is a little bit better really quickly. Another data set when this was published came from Tableau, and I'll send out that link as well. It was authors, the awards that they had won, the books that they had written. And let's say you want to know, these are my authors, how many awards did each of them win? And you're laying it all out on the pane. You have your count of books. You have a lot of null values, but you currently have 59 records, or I'm sorry, 41 rows and 59 books. So that's how it's being calculated right now with these items in view. But when we go to remove, let's take off some of this so we can see what this looks like. Before we put on the count of books or any other records, and we're just looking at the author table, it's only giving me 16 rows. It isn't until we start bringing in other pieces from other tables, our count of books, that suddenly we have 41 records, if you can all see that in the bottom here. And it's summing at 59. But now I have a lot of null values. So what's happening? Tableau in the background is recalculating what that join should look like and how it brings it in. It's making some assumptions on your behalf based on which fields and from which table you're bringing in. And I know that sounds really alarming, but we're gonna cut to it and I'll show you how to see what's actually happening and when to be cautious and when to be trusting. So if I want to know just the authors of the books and how many, I could quickly exclude my null value. I did include anyway, or include only, hold on a second. Exclude, and now I have 16 records, which is what I saw before, and I'm seeing 18 books. The duplicate is coming in for this author and this award, I'm showing 3. And we know if I bring in the book title, I could actually see what those books individually are. Not the best way to visualize it, we'll admit, but what I'm trying to demonstrate is relationships and joins, both individually, can sometimes give you a wrong result because one, you're fixing how the data is structured and coming in across the table for everything. And the other one, Tableau is constantly making these assumptions for you based on what you're bringing into view. So to take it a step back, understanding first what your data structure looks like. What are these individual tables? Is there a different level of detail for each of these tables? And having an understanding of what is the end result we're trying to get to, relationships actually might be much faster. I wouldn't have to write a level of detail calculation if I know all I need to do is bring in these fields from these tables and it's going to calculate it for me. Or maybe a join makes the most sense because I'm going to need lots of different calculations for lots of different levels. So basically trying to demonstrate there is a pro and a con depending on which way you go. One last piece that Jackie Moore taught me and Denise came when we were talking about relationships and joins some time ago that I thought was just eye-opening to me as a non-believer of relationships, and I had a little bit of trust issues. If you haven't before used your performance recording within Tableau, I myself hadn't, there's a start recording or start performance recording. And where this becomes really helpful, not just on the performance side, is you can actually start to understand and process what's happening. What is Tableau doing in the background with your data? So for example, if you open a worksheet, before you throw anything onto the pane, you go to help, settings and performance, and you would start your performance recording. You put out the pieces that you want to know, and once you're done and you decide, okay, I have everything that I need on my worksheet, you would go up here to settings and performance, stop the recording. And what's going to happen is Tableau is going to spit out another workbook that looks like this. And at first it's not the prettiest, but it gives a lot of insight on all of the different pieces and things running, the query that's happening in the background. And then what you see here at the bottom is, okay, well, this is the join that I created when I brought in the data. Okay, that makes sense to me as a SQL-minded folk. But what's happening when I bring it in as a Noodle? And there, I think, becomes the opportunity to really process and understand the same data. So I did this for the same data, same worksheets. I had the same items on the worksheet, and yet for a relationship, a left join was created. And what I had built was a full join. These are the differences. With a join, you're in control. With a relationship, you're allowing Tableau to be in control. So when do you use one versus the other? The pro, I think, for relationships is they do have more dynamic uses, right? Like I said, I kind of have an idea of what I want to get to. I can get to it faster. I don't have to do the fixed LODs. I think it is a little easier with different levels of granularity or cardinality. Some of the cons are, it's not going to work very well with spatial files. They're harder to see what is happening and maybe spot the issue. So I think if you're brand new to a set of data, it might not be the best to immediately bring it in as a relationship. Maybe you look at each table individually and kind of do your high-level analysis and discovery that way first. And then joins, they do mirror SQL, so it does shorten the learning curve. So that's, I guess, a con for relationship. If you have learned SQL, coming in and trying to do a relationship can be a little off-putting. I do think for individuals that are learning Tableau independently and don't have an analytic background, relationships, I think, curve to Tableau. So there's your pros, cons, the nuts and bolts of both sides. I also was playing with the data community a couple of weeks back and had asked, what do you prefer, relationships or joins? And it seems a lot of the community still prefers to use the joins. The article that Kirk Monroe wrote as a guest blog for Kevin and Ken Flerlidge's blog post actually did a great job of explaining the it depends. And if you've spoken to a consultant or data analyst, you probably get really tired of hearing the it depends, but I'll tell you, it really is the most perfect answer because there are pros and cons, and it really does matter on what the data is, what you're trying to get to. So in the end, I think hopefully I've given you enough, if you haven't tried out relationships, to go and play around a little bit more. Also at conference this year, Tableau mentioned that they are going to come out with something called the meatball. I don't want to overwhelm anyone, but maybe we should try to look at understanding relationships, because I think there should be more to come on future data structures in Tableau. So kind of wrapping our head around what are these options and what they look like is a wise choice. Again, more about the analytic vision. If you're interested in connecting and understanding the organization I work with, absolutely love this bunch of people. We have a mission to equip and inspire the next generation of data and technology leaders, which is such a worthy cause in my mind, and really love the organization that I work with. Here is some of my contact information. I welcome anyone that would like to connect, whether it be talking mom stuff, talking data stuff, or Tableau stuff. I'm always open. So thank you again, Sarah and Lawrence, for letting me talk to you guys. It's been great connecting. And I can put the workbook links or the links in the chat. So if you guys want to use and work with those, happy to drop those in the chat.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We really appreciate your presentation. That was great to have that like overview and the differences between the relationships and joins and when to use them. I've found as a newer Tableau user that relationships are like one of the hardest things to Google. The Tableau forums are super helpful, but when I Google relationships, like I get a lot of like mushy TED Talks and things about feelings. So when like trusting relationships and stuff, I was like, oh yeah, I think that came up. So always super helpful to have a presentation. Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Jennifer? You can put them in the Q&A tab of the chat. I did see, it's not a question, but Edgar said, want to give some kudos to Jennifer on her data connections and custom SQL connections. Have been promoting and suggesting them to my clients. So good to have a shout out there. And lots of links in the chat, including the Tableau data set and the book that Jennifer mentioned. All right. And go back to sharing my screen. So now it's time for our attendance prize. We'll pick from among the attendees that are here. Okay. This is live. The winner is Tiffany Powell. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Congratulations, Tiffany. You're the winner of a $25 Tableau store gift card. I will follow up with you to get your email address and get that to you. So congratulations, Tiffany Powell, on winning the gift card. Oh, awesome. Okay. So up next is Ethan Lang. Ethan is the director of Playfair Data Analytics Engineering Team, which is responsible for combining statistical analysis with visual interfaces and that help facilitate the understanding of data for organizations across industries. He is a Tableau ambassador and has authored tutorials and received the Tableau Viz of the Day Award 3 times. A veteran of the U.S. Army, he co-leads the Veterans Advocacy Tableau user group and VizForVets.com to support veterans, military spouses, and active duty personnel by telling their stories through data. He'll be telling us about his new book, Statistical Tableau, which walks the reader through how to implement statistics within your data visualizations. Ethan lives in Kansas City with his wife and 3 children. Thank you, Ethan, for teaching us about the analytics pane and sharing a preview of your new book. We're so glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was an incredible introduction. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll jump in. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, just to kick things off, I always like to just start by sharing some gratitude. Honestly, Sarah and Lawrence, I just wanted to say thank you for putting this together and hosting the event. Like I said earlier, I know a lot goes into putting these events on, especially nowadays. So a lot of gratitude, and I'm very thankful for that, to be here today. And I also just want to say thank you to everyone in the audience as well. I know your time is very valuable. So we really appreciate you coming here and hearing what myself and the other speaker, Jennifer, has to say. So really appreciate you guys being here. But a little bit about myself. Sarah did this much better justice than I will. I am the Director of Analytics Engineering at Playfair Data. I lead our data engineering team, our visual analytics engineering team, as well as our decision science team. It's kind of our data science or statistical analysis team. I do co-lead the Veterans Advocacy Tableau user group. As Sarah mentioned, I'm a veteran myself in the U.S. Army. So I always want to get back to the community and tell those stories of our nation's veterans. I'm also a member of the Tableau Speaker Bureau and a Tableau user group ambassador. But that's enough about me. You guys didn't come here to hear about me. Let's jump into a much more interesting topic, the analytics pane. Like Sarah mentioned, I am in the process of writing a new book called Statistical Tableau. Within this book, the content that I'll cover today is kind of one of the chapters within the book. So it kind of briefly touches on what the analytics pane is and some of the features that Tableau has integrated into the tool for us, so we can bring in and visualize statistical analysis very easily. So I'll start by just giving you an overview of the analytics pane itself. If you're not familiar with the analytics pane, it's right in here within Tableau. Typically, when we open the tool, we'll land on the data pane. This is something we're all familiar with here. Lists our data sources at the top, measures and dimensions, our parameters, sets, what have you. But at the very top of the data pane, there's a toggle right here that says analytics. And if you click on that, it'll toggle to the analytics pane. And the analytics pane is extremely useful. It has a lot of use cases, anything from creating benchmark visualizations, incorporating very advanced statistical analyses. All of that you can do right here from the analytics pane. You can see there's kind of three sections here. One is summarize, then modeling, and then my favorite is the custom section here at the bottom. So within this talk today, I'll be covering each of these options within those three sections in a little bit more detail, starting with the summarize section. So let's just jump right in. And the first option here we see is constant line. And you can see you could just simply grab these options and drag them right in the view. And we're presented with kind of this new little menu here. And what that is saying is we can add this reference line or this constant line to either the X or Y axes or both if we wanted to. And you can simply just drop that option right onto one of these pills or right up here on this little visualization, which kind of shows you what will happen when we draw that constant line there. So you can see it has like a little visual of a bar graph and then just a straight line going across. Now you can see I've added a couple of these already in the view. I have one for 60,000 and then a constant at 80,000. You can edit these. It's pretty easy. You can just jump in and type in a new value, whatever you want it to be. And I like to use constant lines, especially when it's like in terms of benchmarking. If your business or organization has a particular goal you're trying to meet or exceed, you can simply drop one of these constant lines in there. And it's just a very simple way to add some of that extra context for your end users so they can visually see that in the view. Maybe for whatever reason we wanted to, stay within this boundary between 80 and 60,000. Maybe that was a benchmark that the organization was trying to achieve. And using the analytics pane, just very quick way to do that and present that visually. Next, I'll touch on the average line, and this is pretty self-explanatory. It's essentially just drawing an average across the view at whatever level of detail you drop it on here. So you can see if I bring average line from the analytics pane over, we get a new little menu with a new set of little visualizations here. And essentially, this is a great touch by Tableau, in my opinion. I think we're all visual people here. That's why we're probably using Tableau and visualizing data. So I love that they just add these little icons and these little visualizations for us to kind of make sense of what will happen if I drop it here. But you can see I can drop it on the table, and this is called the scope. So you're defining the scope of this model, essentially. So you can drop it on the table, and it will draw an average across the table. If you had multiple panes within the view, you could draw an average line across each pane, or you can draw an average across every individual cell or mark within the view. For now, I'll just drop that on the pane, and you can see it's just going to draw an average line across. Like I said, pretty self-explanatory there, but I'll touch on some different ways that you can use that average line as we kind of move into the modeling. The next one I'll touch on is called the median with quartiles. And you can see if I drag that one in, it's the same scope as average line. And that's going to calculate out the median. And then it adds in these upper and lower quartiles. This is a fantastic visualization, in my opinion. It brings in some elements of what a box plot would represent, but in a much more visual way. I'll show you box plot in a moment. And if we drop the box plot onto this view, like a trend line, you can see it's very, very nasty. Doesn't look very, very presentable. But this median with quartile, like I said, it brings in those box plot elements. So you can get that upper and lower bound whisker in a much more visual format by using this technique. And what that upper and lower quartile would represent, about 50% of your data is within that boundary. So within that band, 50% of the marks live within that band. So again, it's a great way to see a little bit of the distribution. You can see that the upper quartile is pulling a little further from the median, which again, visually makes a lot of sense. We have some marks up here, and we can see that over time, we're kind of trending upwards. So it's kind of pulling on that upper quartile. The next one, like I mentioned, is box plot, and I'll present it in a much more visual format here than dropping it on a trend line. But I've created a box plot by subcategory in our sum of sales. And then I have it written out by region. Couple things to touch on. I think we're familiar with box plots and where they can come into play. But if you're not, they're a fantastic way to really start to observe different elements within your data. Once we start moving into the modeling section, understanding, outliers, the distribution of your data, all of those types of elements are going to come into play and be very important. You can see here, just by drawing these 4 box plots, there's one mark on the view that kind of comes out or sheds some light. This one might be an outlier we need to look into. And just some helpful hints for a view like this. If we do get an outlier within Tableau, what I always like to do is just explore them individually. So I'll right click on that mark and you'll see an option that says view data. If you click that option, it's actually going to pull up the raw data for that mark. And you can just very briefly just kind of comb through and see maybe there was a certain order that was causing that to become an outlier. So you can see here, there's some orders that maybe stand out to me just as I scroll through here. That maybe we need to dive into those specific orders and find out why. In this particular case, it's a good thing. It's actually a good outlier to have. For this region, chairs are, getting a ton of sales. So as an analyst or someone that was working for this particular business, you could dive into that outlier, maybe figure out why. I think that's the most important thing in data is curiosity, always asking why and trying to figure out, maybe there's something here that we could implement across each region to sell more sales in chairs. Maybe that's a good problem to have in this instance. Another helpful hint that I'll touch on here, there's a function in Tableau called random. I've seen some folks present on this. You won't find it in kind of the data dictionary, if you will, within Tableau. I think it's like a hidden function still. But if you, within the flow, double click on the columns or rows shelf and type in random with 2 parentheses, closing it, and enter that, you can jitter this box plot. So I'll increase the size of those marks so you guys can see that a little better. But essentially before, with the box plot, it's all going to line up here on the x-axis on the a 0 mark. And what this does is it jitters all the marks on the view to the left and right a little bit, so you can start to see where those differences lie. This also makes it a lot easier to hover over and kind of explore each mark on the view in a little bit more detail. So for instance, on the east region here, we have 2 marks that are almost right on top of each other. If we reverted back to that other state, we might not be able to hover and view each mark tooltip since they were kind of right on top of one another. So this is just a helpful kind of user experience thing you can implement. Also, I've seen, as a matter of fact, very recently in the last couple of weeks, I think it was a jittered bar chart. So it was essentially the same technique, but there was enough marks in the view to solidify each of these columns, which created a very unique user experience and kind of design. And I think that got visit of the day as well. The next one I'm going to briefly hover over. I don't want to spend too much time here. It's essentially adding totals. There's a lot of ways you can add totals to a crosstab. Obviously, I'm a very visual thinker, so I don't want you guys thinking in crosstabs. But this is how we would add totals from the analytics pane. You can add it as row grand totals, column grand totals. You can add in subtotals. And this is a much easier, quicker way to add those. I think some other options, you can go to totals here from the analysis tab and add them from these. I think there's ways where you can right click and add totals. I've always found this to be probably the most effective and easiest way though. So that's in a nutshell what you can find in the summarize section. The next section is modeling, and this is where we really start getting into very powerful models that Tableau has built within the tool that we can very easily incorporate within our view. So let's jump into that. I'll start with the average line with a 95% confidence interval. And like I mentioned earlier, just to touch on this, essentially this average line is the exact same. So if I were to draw average from the summarize section at the table level of scope, it'll draw the exact same line. Where this difference is, though, is it's adding a 95% confidence interval band. So we can see kind of an upper and lower bound band now. And what that represents, essentially, it's calculating on the back end and running a confidence interval, which is a pretty advanced calculation if you tried to do it by hand, especially with a lot of data. But basically, as we get more data, what this represents is that average line is going to oscillate in between this upper and lower bound and stay within that. And we're 95% confident that it will. So this is a great way that you can kind of see and summarize your data and explore it a little bit more as well. Again, a lot of these techniques, we're trying to bring in these statistical analyses, which are very powerful tools for our end users to make decisions. But presenting it in a very visual format is just a great way to do that. Kind of reduces that barrier to entry as well. A lot of these techniques can be very overwhelming for some users, but to just see it very clearly laid out on a visual makes it easy to digest. The next is very similar. It's the median. So it draws that median line. We get that upper and lower bound, 95% confidence interval. I won't spend too much time here. Essentially, it's the exact same thing as the average, but it's calculating off the median. And what I like to do with this technique is use them in tandem. So if you bring both of those models within the view, we get this kind of unique view here. This is a great view, again, as you're exploring your data and kind of working your way into some of those more advanced models. This is a great analysis that you can do, dragging in both of these to kind of understand the distribution of data, to see if there's outliers and things like that. Typically, if the data is pretty normalized, that average and median line are going to be very close to one another. You can see here, relatively, they're very close. Where we would start to see some concern, and why this is so cool to see it visually, is if our average and its 95% confidence band was outside of our median band. You can see here with this darker band, there is some overlap, which is good to see, especially as we start to get into that modeling, like I said. Means that, sure, the median and average are kind of coming off one another, but it's not that much cause for alarm just yet. So very quick analysis that you can do to kind of understand your data a little more. Now, the next three are very powerful models. The first one I'll touch on is Trendline. And I think it's so funny because Tableau has named this model Trendline, but to me, it just does not do it justice. There's so much more under the hood here. If I drag Trendline onto the view, you can see it presents 5 different scopes, if you will. And these are actually different regression models that you can apply directly within your view. So let me drop it on linear. And on the surface, it draws this linear trend line. And again, just thinking about this visually, stepping outside the statistical thinking for a moment, if we just look at that trend line and we look at the line chart we have underneath it, it makes sense. We kind of started in November, kind of low on sales. And then as we've progressed, we've kind of moved up to the upper right-hand corner of the screen. So the trend line represents that and makes a lot of sense there. But it's not just a visual way to look at the trend of your data and see, I guess what the percent grade here of this incline is. But essentially, this is a linear regression. So if we hover over this line, we're kind of presented with a little bit of the summary statistics underneath the hood, where we see sales equals, and then you'll see some constants in some dimension members in there. That's a regression algorithm. It's essentially the regression model. And it starts with where it says plus negative 1.25. That's how much that line is increasing over time. And then that 29,062.48, that's essentially the intercept on the y-axis. So we can see how that model comes together. We're also presented with 2 other summary statistics here, R squared and the p-value. And our R squared, what that represents is our model is currently using the month of order date. And it's saying that just the month of when these sales were captured explains about 25% of this regression model or our data or sales itself, which is really interesting. And then p-value at the bottom, that's kind of if our model is statistically significant or not. I won't spend too much time on what all those mean in more detail, but on average in the industry, we'd be looking for a p-value less than 0.05, but that's also up for interpretation. Now, a couple other things on the trend line. If you right-click on it, you'll see some different options here that come into play. If I click Describe Trend Line, it will pop up and kind of give me a very brief summary statistics. So we can see each coefficient here, their values, which again, just thinking back to the tooltip, these are the same values we saw in that equation. That's where it's pulling in those coefficients and applying the model to get that trend line. We also see the p-value and kind of some summary statistics for each of those coefficients individually. I'll close that. Another option, if we describe the trend model, this goes into a lot more detail and provides us a lot more information. For those that are more statistically savvy, this is very similar to the output or the summary statistics that you would see in R or Python when you're creating these models. But we can see here, we can have access to the mean squared error, R squared, standard errors, p-values, the degrees of freedom, so on. Last, there's this edit trend lines. This is really cool. So this is cool for many reasons, in my opinion. One, it just gives us a very simple layout to toggle between different models. So I can toggle on the polynomial, exponential, linear, and I can kind of see how those are performing on our data. I can also include some different options here. So for instance, if I did not want folks rolling over the trend line and seeing some of the equations and stuff underneath the hood, I can turn those options off directly from this view. To close the loop on trend line, I do just want to touch on one other model within here. It's the polynomial regression model. And you can see here that this this particular model, instead of it just being a linear line, it does give us a little bit of curvature here, which fits this particular data a lot better. So if we hover over, oh, I turned my tooltips off. All right, if we hover over, we can see a much more detailed algorithm, which is that polynomial. And really what it's done here is it's added a cube and a square to our equation. And those two values, that's what's causing this curvature. We can also see that by changing this, if we look at our R² value, this model actually explains our data a lot better. And it's also still statistically significant if we look at our p-value. So again, I know I'm saying p-value and R², again, just very outside the statistical realm. If we look at this from an analytics and visual perspective, it makes so much sense that this model would fit the data better. If we just had a linear trend line, it's going, from one point to another point. It's linear, like it says. But this, our data does kind of go up and down, has some seasonality to it. And if we just think through this visually, we kind of start here, and then sales over the course of, 2 years or so seems relatively flat. But then as we get into November 2020 and beyond, it does kind of start ramping up, and that's where you'll see this model kind of follow that same trend. So again, just visually, it makes a lot of sense that this would fit our data much better. That was a lot about regression models and stuff. Bear with me. Forecasting is a lot more easier concept to explain. So obviously, we have our forecast model here. Underneath the hood, Tableau is using a model called exponential smoothing to calculate out its forecast. Exponential smoothing is a lot like a rolling average, except it's applying weights to different values over the course of time. To kind of sum up that thinking, these values here towards the end are going to have more weight than these values towards the beginning of our analysis. With that said, as you add more data, your forecast is going to get a little bit more correct or more accurate, if you will. And we can see that represented here by these bands. These are prediction intervals, very similar to what a confidence interval was visually, but it's looking at the predictions moving forward into time. A couple things to call out with forecasts. If you right-click on the model or the forecast, again, you're presented with some new options. If you hover over that forecast option, you can describe the forecast. And again, for those that are more statistically savvy, you're getting a lot of those summary statistics that you would get in R or Python. And you can kind of analyze that to analyze your model. You can also right-click on forecast and go to forecast options. And this is actually a pretty cool little menu. When we run this forecast model, Tableau actually goes through 8 different algorithms and applies those and chooses the best one for you. But if you want to change those parameters and go back to a specific model or algorithm, you can do that directly from this menu. So just to touch real quick on these two, we have our forecast length. I can change the length of time I want to forecast or the level of detail. And then our source data, again, and this is just, it's aggregated by month. We can change that date part. We can also ignore certain months, that kind of thing. This forecast model is where you can start to play around with some of those parameters and change the model itself. So you can see when I switch to custom, it presents us with these 2 parameters, trend and season. And you can toggle these to different options. And essentially that'll change the algorithm itself and give you different results. So for those, again, that are a little bit more statistical savvy, this gives you a very easy way to explore some of those other models directly from within Tableau without having to do any coding or bringing in any data to R or Python. It's all directly from this interface here. Let me cover clustering, and then we'll get to my absolute favorite, which is the custom section. But clustering is very self-explanatory, and I think it's probably one of the easiest, entry-level models that folks that are interested in this stuff can do. So the clustering model that Tableau has is k-means. So it's looking at the mark on the view and getting its, and then looking at mean values for multiple marks on the view. And then it's clustering them depending on how close that mark is to the cluster's average, if you will. So that's just a brief explanation. But if I drop this onto, say, a scatter plot, it builds out these clusters, and it automatically adds that to the color property of our marks card. So it visually represents each cluster by color. So we can see here I have 4 clusters, and again, these kind of make sense. But Tableau also gives us a way to, there again, play with some of these parameters directly from within the tool. So to touch on, you can describe clusters. Again, if you're interested in this stuff, you can come through all the summary statistics here. And then if I right click again and hit edit cluster, get a very simple menu here where I can switch in, change out different variables within the model. I can also define how many clusters I want it to calculate. So if I wanted 8 clusters, I can make that change here. And you can see it's applied it in real time into our data or onto our view. Now for the fun part, this custom section. So Tableau gives us a lot of tools within Tableau that we can bring in, very powerful models that we can play around with and kind of fit our data. Again, all this is to just keep adding in context for our users and allow our decision makers to make decisions quicker and more accurate. And they also have more confidence in the decision that they're making by bringing in these statistical models into the view. Custom allows us to bring in stuff, though, that's outside of Tableau's scope in the models that they've brought in. So for instance, to show you some of the art of the possible here, you can drag in anything from the custom, and you can see very quickly, it gives you a lot more options. So if we think of a reference line and go back to what our constant line was, when I drug constant line in the view, I was presented with one option. It was table, and I had these 2 pills. I could do the X or Y axes. By dragging reference line into the view, it gives me every option available. So it allows me to do just about whatever I want and apply these reference lines wherever I want. Once that reference line is on the view, you can see you're presented with this information. You can change that scope level right here. If we think back to those little visualizations, these radio buttons represent that. I can change the value I want to calculate it on. I can connect it to a parameter if I wanted user feedback. Now the user can type in certain parameters and it affects these models, which is a really cool feature. And then I can also format all this stuff. I can also switch between some of the custom options. So between bands or distributions, box plots, and so on. For now, though, I've applied a couple things here. Let me just remove this. I have standard deviations here, and this is a great way. Standard deviations are a great way to start detecting outliers within your data. And you can see I've added these as reference lines. So it gives us kind of an upper and lower bound standard deviation. And I have it at 1 standard deviation and 2 standard deviations. If I edit those reference lines, I can play with those values. So right here where it says computation, I can click on value. I can change it to quartiles if I wanted to. Again, looking at the median with quartiles, this was what that would represent visually. Standard deviation, percentiles, and so on. I can also change these factors here. So if I wanted to go to 3 standard deviations, I can just simply make that adjustment there, and you can see that applied in real time where it's creating that calculation. Now I said, you can bring in different models. This is standard deviations, which again is kind of native, but I've created this view to kind of outline some of the models that you can actually build. So again, I was looking at standard deviations here, but then I created a Z-score test as well. And this is an algorithm that's outside of what Tableau has that you can bring in and do. And essentially, if you look under the hood in this particular workbook, you can look at Z-score test, and this is the algorithm essentially. So I've just written a calculated field and brought that algorithm in, and then I can apply that algorithm as a custom reference line. And now we have Z-score test, a model that's outside of Tableau, built and presenting the data visually, and it reacts to different filters and everything else within the tool itself. So again, it's a very powerful tool or product that you can add that will give the users a little bit more visual cues on what's good, what's bad, what we need to pay attention to. And they can also then start asking themselves the question, why is this important? How can we take advantage of this? Is this something we need to look at or spend our time, mulling over? Let me hop back over to the screen. But that is a brief overview of the analytics pane and the content that I wanted to cover today. To touch on some more resources, if you're interested in this stuff, please visit playfairdata.com. We have our blog. All of this stuff, these 3 models that I have here, this is covered in our blog. This workbook is also available on Playfair Data's Tableau Public. So you feel free to download this workbook, re-engineer some of this conditional formatting, re-engineer how I created these reference lines and so on, and apply it into your own work. Obviously, we have other resources, books. Ryan Sleeper's written 3. Like I said, I'm working on my book, Statistical Tableau. Here's a QR code to our blog and our resources. So feel free to scan that. And with that, I'll leave this on the screen for a moment, and I'll take any questions if anyone has questions.
Thank you so much, Ethan, for that great presentation. So much stuff I didn't even realize that Tableau could do. And so many flashbacks of my stats classes in grad school. I know some of this stuff. We have a couple questions in the Q&A. Emmanuel asks, is it possible to show the equation as a label instead of hovering?
On the trend lines, I'm imagining.
Yes, I believe so.
Yes, you can do that. It requires a little bit more. You can't just necessarily create, I guess you could create a text label and add that to the view, but if you change the level of detail or add a filter, that text label is not going to update the model in real time, right? So what you would need to do is write several calculated fields that essentially is creating that linear line, and then apply those using parameters and such into that text label. So as you filter the view, your trend line will update visually, and then your label will update as well. But you would have to break down the calculation. There's also a blog on our Playfair Data blog. If you look up linear regressions in Tableau, Maddie, she's our manager of decision science at Playfair. She wrote a blog on how to create those calculations and isolate, your y-intercept and your coefficient values. That'd be perfect for that use case.
Sounds great. Thank you. Jeffrey asks, is it possible to have a dynamic reference line displayed, like the first part of the year, the target was X, and the last part of the year got adjusted and is now Y? So that same thing of dynamic information.
Yep. Again, it goes back to essentially that same tactic I just mentioned. Let me just show you that live, so you guys have an understanding of it. I'll share my screen one more time here. So with those reference lines, if I bring in any calculated field, let's see, do I even have any profit ratio? I can drop that onto detail. So it's not changing anything in my view, but if I add a reference line, I can now reference that value as a reference line, and I can add it to the view visually. So as whatever that calculated field, you mentioned, like if it was a different milestone or something like that, if that milestone changes based on the filters, it will automatically update. if you point it to that calculated field. Same thing with a parameter. Notice when I click value here, I have the option to create a new parameter or reference a parameter to this line. So you could actually get in real time input from your user using a parameter, and that reference line would update depending on what your user inputs to the tool. Does that answer your questions?
There's another question from Mick. For the trend lines, which is better for R squared, closer to 1 or 0?
Gotcha. It would be closer to 1 is where you want to get it to. In real life, it's never going to be exactly 1. If it was, I would definitely be, that'd be very suspicious to me. If your R squared was 1. But yeah, you want it closer to 1. That means it's explaining more of your dependent variable, essentially.
Yeah, I think my stats teacher asked Mick to put that in the chat. I'm like, what would it be? Thanks for your question.
For sure.
Sorry if I mispronounced this. Abilasha asked, can we have 2 colors in the trend line, green for above the line and red for below the line? So.
Yeah, absolutely. Conditional formatting. Sorry, I'll share my screen again. But you can write calculated fields for that conditional formatting, very similar to what I did here. So this is essentially a dual axes chart. So I have a line chart, and then I've dual axed the same measure, and I'm using circle to encode those marks. And then what I've done is I've written these conditional formatting, which is this, I believe. And this is actually what's defining the color of those marks in the view. So you can see if it's less than this thing, it's bad. If it's greater than all of this stuff, then it's good. Else it's expected. And that's where I get those 3 different distinct colors here for bad, expected, and good anomalies. You could apply that same technique to the trend line. But again, like I answered earlier, you would have to isolate that regression model. So you'd need to write calculated fields to isolate each value, your y-intercept, the coefficient, and then bring in the whatever value you're using as your response to do that conditional formatting on a trend line. But it is possible, for sure.
That's really helpful. And I think that conditional formatting can be so valuable to our end users who are that mental shortcut of like, where does this stand? How does this compare to previous times or other categories? So thank you.
Absolutely.
We have another question from Lewis. If I have data about both past predictions the model has made in the past and historical data for what actually happened, is there a way to represent that using these tools? This would make way for a calculation showing the performance of the model over time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely delved into that myself. That's a great question. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. Just like anything in Tableau, there's probably 1,000 ways I could explain it. What I would personally do is create a line chart of your actuals, maybe a line chart of your predictions, either put them together in a dual axes line chart so you can see them, and then encode the difference between each with a bar chart, if you will, or a diverging bar chart. That'd be one way to do it. You'd kind of almost end up with what looks like a DNA chart. If you think of like a strand of DNA where it represents, the bar chart would represent the difference between the prediction and the actual. I think that'd be a very, very interesting visualization you could create to represent that. Other than that, though, you could look at, you could create a crosstab of the differences and maybe highlight the differences based on some sort of conditional formatting. So you could also apply a statistical analysis to your statistical analysis, if you will, to look for outliers within your model. Be another great way to do it.
Heavy meta, so model for your statistical model.
For sure.
Yeah, lots of great questions. Thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate it. The only other question I had is, when is your book coming out? And if it's a sore subject, you can't throw anything at me because it's virtual. So
No, I totally can. I will say I'm writing as fast as I can. Everyone keeps saying at O'Reilly, they're like, this is the most like the fastest someone's like tried to do this. I'm trying to get it done in a year, write the whole book. And my goal is to have the full editorial and technical review implemented by the end of this year. So that gives me, 3.5 months. I'm close though, very close. And then after that, the official release date is September of 2024. Because I'm taking this more aggressive roadmap, this could be moved forward, but I'm hoping to start editorial and copyright kind of reviews in early of 2024. And then after that, anytime between March and September, I suppose. But this is the official release date. You can also, if you're an O'Reilly subscriber, you can actually, what they do is called early release, where they give me this cool little chick here. It represents growth and, starting from somewhere and growing. But you get early release access to the content. So you can actually come in here. This is like unedited, so you can see how bad I am in grammar. And it also doesn't have any technical reviews implemented yet. So it's literally just the raw editorial. And right now they've released, let me see how many chapters here. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chapters. So you get some anomaly detection, understanding distribution in Tableau, benchmarking in Tableau. I go into depth on confidence intervals and pick that apart. Again, that content I just covered is essentially chapter 2, which talks through some of the native stuff within Tableau. And then this introduction chapter, please don't read it. I have to rewrite the whole thing. But this is all available now. You could check it out.
Very cool. Well, congratulations on all of your progress, and thanks for sharing it with us. I was geeking out on yours and Jennifer's presentation too.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. And again, I appreciate you putting this together and hosting the event. Thank you. Oh, I think, Sarah, you're on mute.
I sure am. So thanks. Thanks, Ethan. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen for the last slide. And so thank you, friends, for attending. And thank you, Jennifer and Ethan, for your fantastic presentations. So attendees will be receiving an email with a feedback survey for our group, for Lawrence and I. We're data people and appreciate data and feedback about this meeting. And we'll be uploading the event recording on YouTube soon at DataPride Tug and the DataFam channel as well. Our next event is Thursday, September 14th at 1 o'clock Central Time, Chicago time. And we're doing September. It's going to be all about sets, maybe a Workout Wednesday example related to sets, use cases from higher education. It's going to be a lot of fun. And join our group on the Tableau user group page for updates. So on a personal note, my wife and I are going to a Brandy Carlisle concert tonight. I am super excited for it. if you've been to a Brandi Carlile concert, let me know. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your summer. Take care.